Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing the mid-year book tag. It's basically a tradition at this point here on BookTube to kind of take stock at how the year is going this far and looking forward to the latter half of the year and get stressed about all the things that we still have yet to do. So far at this point in the year, I have read 63 books. I've read some really great books, ones that I wish that I could read again for the very first time. And I also have read some books that I wish that I didn't read at all. I'm going to tie in my quarterly nerdy bookish stats throughout this video while also answering some questions that you all had for me for my reading year so far that I put a question box on over on my Instagram. But the very first question, which was very difficult for me to answer, was what's the best book that you've read so far in 2024? That's a great question. If you came here for a creator that gives you a concise one book per answer tag, I'm not your girl. I have 3 books to tell you about because I can't decide. First, I think I want to say that the most fun that I've had in my reading year so far was when I read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a new take on the locked room murder mystery, and our narrator constantly breaks the fourth wall and is talking directly to us about the situation that is unfolding. It is just, like I said, the most fun that I've had reading a book in a very long time. I was gasping. I had to bring my jaw up off the ground when I read this book and got to all the plot twists. I truly love this book so much. So this is definitely in the running. Another book that I read recently is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is a small town literary fiction book that involves a junior hockey team and a horrible tragedy that goes on within this community, and it basically changes the course of everyone's life and the life of the town. I just love Frederick Bachman's writing so much, and this book had me sobbing. But by the end of it, it just felt so worth it. Man, I love it. I love it. And then the other book, I can't not put a fantasy on my best book of the year running because it wouldn't be true to myself, but definitely The Will of the Many by James Islington. I read this book way back in January or February, I think January. And this fantasy book has the chosen one trope where our main character is going undercover to attend this elite academy. And our main character has so many secrets that we're learning throughout the book. If people find out who he is within the academy, then they'll kill him. If the people who are using him find out what he's doing, then they'll kill him too. They'll have no use for him. The world building and plot within this story is just so massive. Honestly, the further books in this series are bound to be an absolute roller coaster because the way that this book ended, the last 100 pages, they were wild. And I cannot wait to continue. It was just beautifully constructed, truly. Question number 2 is, what is the best sequel that you've read in 2024? And I don't think that I've read a ton of sequels, but that statement feels wrong too. I don't really know. But I'm going to go with Swift and Saddled by Lila Sage. The first book in this Rebel Blue Ranch series is done and dusted. I'm sure we've all heard about it because it is the talk of the town. But this is book 2 and I loved it. I loved it so much more than Done and Dusted, which I still liked Done and Dusted, but Swift and Saddled, boy howdy, was it phenomenal. The only reason it got 4.5 instead of 5 was because I felt like it could have been longer. I felt like we could have drawn out the slow burn a little bit more. This small town cowboy romance is just, it was so good. I cannot wait to continue it. I feel safe putting this one as my favorite sequel so far. Question number 3 is, what new releases haven't you read yet but you really want to? So many. We'll start with The Ministry of Time by Kaitlyn Bradley. This is a sci-fi romance time travel sort of thing, and it's gotten some pretty good praise. I actually got this as an ARC months ago and I still haven't read it. It's so frustrating. I hate myself for it. But I'm obsessed with this cover. I'm obsessed with the vague synopsis and that I also think that it could make me cry. Sign me up. I think it sounds phenomenal and I really want to read it. Next, I just got recently, which is Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi. Everything they've written, I've given 4 or 5 stars. I think this one will be no different. I'll give you the little quotable synopsis that says, one weekend, the elite underbelly of a Nigerian city, a party that goes awry, a tangled web of sex and lies and corruption that leaves no one unscathed. I think there's like some sort of mystery and there's glitz and glam and drama. And I know I love their writing, so I need to read it immediately. Then of course, my boy Paul Tremblay came out with Horror Movie, and I'm so excited to read it. It's a play on like the cursed film genre, and if you know anything about me, or if you've watched the one video that I've mentioned this before, but I love the cursed film genre. Like Sinister, that movie, phenomenal. 10 out of 10. And I know I love Paul Tremblay's writing. I also know it's not for everybody, but like the Pallbearers Club, I loved it. So I'm really excited to bring that atmosphere that I know he can create into this horror book, or should I say horror movie? I'm really excited. I'm really stoked. Also, I don't have it yet, but it is Goddess of the River by Vishnavavi Patel. I read Kaike, which is literally right there, and loved it. 5 stars. I'm really excited to experience her world building and storytelling once again because it was flawless the first time. Then the last one that I'll put on this one question, the singular question that I'm still talking about, is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers, the author that wrote Cleopatra and Frankenstein. And I absolutely adore this book with my entire heart. And I'm pretty sure that Blue Sisters talks a lot about grief and sisterhood. Other than that, I don't know much. All I know is that this was 4.5 to 5 stars. And that's enough to make me really excited to check out what else she writes. Question number 4 might be a little overwhelming. Are you ready? What is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I literally have like 8 written down. Okay, we're just gonna do rapid fire. These are the books that I am so excited about. Okay. Children of Anguish and Anarchy. It is the final book in the Legacy of Orisha series written by Tomi Adeyemi. The first one is Children of Blood and Bone. I'm rereading that book this month, which the first book in this series was one of the books that got me back into reading as an adult, and I just hold it so near and dear. I cannot wait to read the 3rd book and complete the trilogy. Then we have Graveyard Shift by ML Rio. Guys, I know nothing. I know nothing about it. All I know is I am obsessed with If We Were Villains, and this cover, say less. Then we have The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. Have I read by this author before? No, but I have watched Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is obviously based on their book. And the synopsis of The Pairing just sounds like a messy, goofy time. Lots of bisexual representation, and I know the 2 main characters are involved in some sort of like competition between the 2 of them to prove to the other that they're over each other, and they're clearly not, and I just think I'm gonna eat it up. And then of course I'm excited for Lost and Lassoed, which is the next book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. I forgot this was down there and I almost just knocked it over completely. Oh my goodness. There are so many good books coming out. Next is Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This is the same author of Our Wives Under the Sea, which was definitely one of my favorite books of last year or the year before. I think it was last year. Regardless, I know I love her writing. I know I want to read this immediately. I'm assuming it's going to be another psychological horror because that's what Our Wives Under the Sea was. Indeed, it is. I'm so excited about it. We have the next book in the world of The Crowns of Nyaxia, and it is The Songbird and the Heart of Stone. There's a character in the first duet called Serpent and the Wings of Night. The character we're following from that series is getting her own book in this one, and her name is Mish, and I loved her a lot, and I'm really excited to follow her. The Crowns of Nyaxia duet was just like a fun time. I recommend it to everyone because it was just so fun and like easily readable, and that makes me really excited for this new book to come out, so I'm excited. Okay, 2 more and then I'm done, I promise. I'm really excited about a lot of books. Ooh, the next book in the Flesh and False Gods series, which the first book is Immortal Longings. The next one is Vilest Things. That one comes out in the last half of the year, and you'll see this book again, but I'm excited for the sequel. Then, even though I haven't started this series at all, I have to mention my boy John Gwynn. His next book in the Bloodsworn series comes out, which is The Fury of the Gods. First book in the series being Shadow of the Gods. I haven't started it, but I am just excited for him because now it'll be completed. I think it's just a trilogy. Regardless, John Gwynn, my favorite. Okay, let's move on to another question. Question number 5 is, what books surprised you the most? I said you'd see it again. Here it is, a couple seconds later. Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong is by far, I don't know, definitely one of the most surprising books I've read this year. I went into it not really expecting much, only because I read These Violent Delights by this author and I didn't really love it. And I wasn't sure if it was the writing or just the story itself, but I went into this not really knowing what to expect, and I am kind of obsessed with it. I've heard very mixed reviews on this first book in the series, and I don't really understand the negative ones. I thought it was so cool. In the story, we're following the situation where every year the city of San Air hosts this like big televised game, which is basically a fight to the death, and the winner gets a lot of money and so on and so forth. The magic in this world is that people can body jump. And I'm just remembering some of the plot twists in here. Like, why don't you like this? This is so good. I know that was a really horrible synopsis, but the games are really exciting. The battles are very intense. The politics and the characters, like, I just loved it. Okay? Very surprising. Loved this one a lot. It's on the list. And then also, let me tell you that The Family Game by Catherine Steadman is definitely one of my most surprising of the year. I feel like so many people hate this book. In surface level, it sounds nothing too special because it's like just another rich family that has their hands in a lot of people's lives and they have a lot of influence and they're obviously into some weird stuff. But our main character gets like roped into the family, is going to marry one of the sons, and we just learn all of these different little games that this family plays. And it's psychological, it's a little bit scary. The last half of the book was just like nonstop. Couldn't put it down. I ate it up. I ate it up. And it was also a book that while I was reading it, I was like cringing away because I was scared to read the next sentence a couple times. I don't know if scared is the right word, but uneasy for sure. I had a grand old time. I also want to give a shout out to Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll in this category. It was a big surprise for me because I kind of thought that I would enjoy the book, but I didn't know that I would love it as much as I do. The writing is just phenomenal. It's basically following the victims of Ted Bundy without ever naming him, and we're following their story, giving them a voice instead of the serial killers. And it was really, 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 really well done. The writing was stunning, okay? And just thinking through all of the things that happen in this book, it just reminds me why it deserves a place on like one of my favorites so far of the year. Now on to a question that's not so fun. Question number 6 is, what are your biggest disappointments or DNFs of the year? Biggest disappointment for me is going to be The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. I read her first book and really, really loved it. I was expecting to at least have a good time listening to this book, and I just simply didn't. I couldn't follow any of the tangents that she went on trying to explain the points that she was making in the separate chapters. I just felt so scattered. And like at the end of the book, I genuinely couldn't tell you anything that this is about. I couldn't tell you anything I took away from it. And it's not like I was passively listening either. Like I was listening. And I've talked to quite a few people that feel the same way. So it kind of makes me feel a little bit more valid in that it wasn't just me. So yeah, this is definitely on my most disappointing, which is unfortunate. And then let me just put my most disappointing reads, every book I've read by Geneva Rose. You Shouldn't Have Come Here, as well as The Perfect Marriage. I literally don't even want to talk about either of them. They're so absurd and like beyond the suspension of disbelief. Like I can't. It's kind of funny for me because when I think about these books, it's funny to me how much I don't like them because I also ate them up. Like, let me clarify. You Should Have Come Here, I kind of ate up. Perfect Marriage, I could have put that book down, but it was for a video. But both of them, I didn't like them. I didn't like how they were written. I didn't like how the story was told. I don't think that I will pick up another book by Geneva. If I do, then mind your own business. But I know that I didn't like either of these, so those were just a time. Another disappointment for me is Finlay Donovan is Killing It by Elle Casamano. This is a book that I didn't like, but I would still recommend to people because it's a cozy mystery. It has some high stakes, and I know a lot of people like it. It does have its audience. It just wasn't me. I am not the audience. So I still recommend this to people, but I was just bored to tears. I thought that I would have a good time, and I just could not wait for it to be done. Then very quickly, I'll go through my DNFs of the year so far. There are only 4, which is pretty good, and all of them are soft DNFs. I didn't DNF anything because I didn't like it. All of these I do plan on picking up again. When I was starting to read them, it just wasn't the time. So Bellies by Nicola Deanan, as well as Northwoods by Daniel Mason, and Fall Lady Fortune by Chloe Gong, and The End of August by You Mary. The thing is I wasn't necessarily not enjoying any of these, but these two in particular particular, Bellies and Northwoods, I was listening to on audio and found out that I needed to sit down and read them. Bellies because I didn't like the narrator's voice. That sounds so mean, but like the way that the narration was, I wasn't enjoying it. And then Northwoods by Daniel Mason. This physical copy is so beautiful and it has so many like little photos, things that I wasn't getting through the audiobook. And I think it would really add to my reading experience. And plus I wasn't like following well enough in the audiobook. So I want to sit down and read this one. And then when I picked up Fall Lady Fortune, my heart just wasn't in it. I wasn't wanting to read this at this time. I had a lot of other things that I wanted and should have been doing. So I put this one down because if I forced myself to read it, I probably wouldn't have rated it as high as it deserves. So I put this down for now. I'll read it at some point, but just not now. And same with The End of August by You Mary. I actually think that this book, the writing style is so different and I was really enjoying it, but historical fiction for me is really difficult sometimes. And this one makes me nervous because I know that the writing style is very interesting for me and like I was really excited about it, but it was also very hard to hold my attention to it. So I'm going to try it again, but I did soft DNF it a couple months ago. Question number 7 is favorite new author, debut, or new to you. One of the stats that I keep track of on my story graph is literally whether the author is new to me or if it's a repeat author. And so far in 2024, 63% of my books that I've read are new to me authors, which is really exciting. That leaves 37% are repeat authors. And I really like how that's falling, but I will say one of my goals for the second half of the year is to read more sequels and read some more series. So I hope that the repeat author percentage goes up a little bit, but I still am always really excited to try out new authors. So that's a fun little stat. And since I've read so many new authors this year, I do have some new favorites that I'm really excited to pick up for their books. One is for sure Holly Gramazio. I think the way that she wrote this book was just so engaging and almost reminded me of a mashup of Emily Henry meets Gabrielle Zevin. And I would be so elated to pick up another book by her. Likewise, I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman and absolutely loved it. I think that it takes a very special writer to be able to capture the actual interior monologue of like an old lady. And I think he did it so perfectly. I loved this book. It was like a wholesome, sad, cozy, happy little hug. All of those things. And I'm so excited to continue this series because of his writing. Another author I'd be excited to read other books by is Emily Austen. I loved how conversational her writing felt. Like I was talking to an old friend about this like really sad, emotional story. And then honorable mentions obviously are Frederick Bachman for similar reasons. Like his one-liners and the way that he writes is just so quotable. I think he's a real gem in our generation. Like I'm so thankful that I get to read his books. And then James Islington. I mean, this book has put him on my radar and I plan on reading his backlist. I plan on reading other things that he writes in the future. I think his writing is phenomenal and I'm really excited that I read this book. The next question is one that I added in here because I wanted to talk about this book and I think it's a fun question. It's what's a book that you loved but you can't necessarily recommend to people? And that's going to be Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. The thing is I do recommend this book, but I can't like consciously recommend this book to the masses. You have to want to read it. You have to be in the right mindset for this type of story. And how I describe it is it doesn't sound like it's really selling it, but I've said it in the past and other people have been like, oh, perfect. That makes me want to read it. So how I see this book is it's the most like bleakest story and hopeless story that I've read in a very long time. It is very sad and very dark in a like mental illness and emotional sense. 100% look up trigger warnings for this book if you do plan on picking it up. It got 5 stars for me. Like it was written so well, but it was really emotional. So read with caution. I think that's the only question that I only had one answer for. Oh boy. Next question is a book that made you cry. I already kind of mentioned that Beartown by Frederick Bachman made me cry. And I mean, I sobbed. Like I sobbed at this book as well as Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Okay. This one I sobbed for like 20 minutes. Oh my God, both of them. I literally ugly cried for like 20 minutes after I finished both of these books. Like it's astounding to me looking back at how many tears were shed. So many. But I would recommend both of these wholeheartedly. I would also tell you to look up trigger warnings for these ones as well, because both discuss really heavy topics and they got me. They both really got me. The next book that also made me cry, but it's also going to go into the next question as well, which is a book that made you happy. Oh, it's Funny Story by Emily Henry. 100%. I know the moment that I opened this book and read the first paragraph, I was so happy to be in an Emily Henry book again. I don't know what it is. I don't know what she does, but her books are so addictive addicting, and it just feels like coming home. I genuinely don't know what to tell you other than from the moment I started reading this book, I was just so happy to be here. It made me cry and it made me so happy at the same time. The other book that I've read this year that made me so happy for very similar reasons is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This was a reread. I read this years ago, but I reread it in January for my book club. It again just kind of felt like coming home. Like it's one of my favorite books, and it was solidified this year that yeah, it is. It is one of my favorite books. It's such a massive puzzle piece. The writing is so flowery. This is the benchmark for lyrical writing, for me at least. It's confusing, it's atmospheric, and just so beautiful. I love it. I love it with my whole heart. It made me so happy to be reading it again. Question 11 is, what is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received? And I would say The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This is the Fairy Loot edition, and it is just beautiful. It has little honeycombs and bees on the side. I love the cover anyways, as well as the naked hardback, of course, is a little honey pot, and it's just so beautiful. Of course, it has a reversible dust jacket. It's stunning. Fairy Loot does a great job. Like, look at this little bee. Look at that little bee over there. So cute. Question number 12 is the question that everyone, you know, gets angry about, and it's, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Literally so many, is my answer every single year. I would say my priority is more fantasy and more fantasy series, predominantly some like classical fantasy, as well as newer releases that are coming out. But I started my Robin Hobb journey and started Assassin's Apprentice, so I will be continuing the Farseer trilogy for sure. In addition to expanding the books I've read by Brandon Sanderson, I've also loved so many of his books, and I plan on starting and continuing the Stormlight Archive. First book is The Way of Kings. It's downstairs. I don't feel like grabbing it, but that one is definitely happening in the next week or so, but I'm really looking forward to starting that series. And then I would just say like other books that I'm excited about, like continuing the Thursday Murder Club series, starting other series that I'm really looking forward to, like The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, as well as literally all of John Gwynn's books. Like there's a lot that I would like to read immediately, and the lack of time is always stressful, so we'll leave it there for now. And then over on my Instagram stories, I asked you guys if you had any specific questions for like how my reading year has gone so far. And one of the questions had to do with audiobooks, like what was your favorite audiobook of the year or something like that. And this kind of goes directly into one of my bookish stats that I keep track of, and it's how the stories that I read, how are they consumed? This little graph shows that 81% of my reads are audio and physical, meaning that I either physically sit down and read the book while listening to the audio and do a tandem read, or I have the audiobook and the physical book, and sometimes I listen, sometimes I sit down and read. That's 81% of my reading. It makes sense. It's my favorite method of consuming stories. Under that is Kindle audio, literally the same thing except on Kindle. 5% of my reads have been only audio, and then 3% I have physically read without the audiobook. My favorite audiobooks so far this year have been definitely Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is her memoir, and it's just beautifully written. I don't rate nonfiction every single time, but this is 5 stars because her storytelling and the way that she kept bringing specific themes back up and tied up the story so beautifully. I know that I cried in the first chapter of this book too. It's just really good, and I would recommend the audiobook because she narrates it and it's phenomenal. Another audiobook I would recommend is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. It has a podcast element that's really fun, and it has a little bit of like music and sound effects. It was a very engaging read. And then I also just have to recommend Funny Story just for my own sake, because the narrator is just so cozy at this point. Hearing that specific narrator's voice while knowing that it's an Emily Henry book, like it just felt like home. It felt so nice, and I would always recommend her books, period. But yeah. Another question that I got, which was my favorite one, and I hope that I'm answering it well enough to what it deserves, but it was, what character gives the biggest Caleb energy? And I was obsessed with this. I think what I'm going to go with is Miles from Funny Story, because both Caleb and Miles are very sweet, a little bit silly, definitely like misunderstood boys, you know what I'm saying? And both of them are too kind for their own good. Like, will go out of their way and ruin other plans or ruin other things to help someone else out, which is phenomenal. It's a great trait to have. I'm not saying that it's bad, but too kind for your own good, for sure. That's both of them. They're both very passionate people and obviously very cute, except Caleb refuses to wear Crocs and Miles wears Crocs. Another question is, what book was so good that you wish that you wrote it? Loved this question. And I had to go with the two genres that I feel like I would or am most interested in writing, and it would be either The Husbands by Holly Gramazio, because it's definitely a romance book, but it also leans really far into like the just general literary fiction genre, sort of. I don't know if people would agree with me on that, but regardless, I loved how this was written, and this is how I would want to write a story that involves just like a general lit fic with romance. Like this is what I would want to write. And I guess also I will say The Will of the Many, even though it doesn't have dragons, I would want my fantasy to have dragons in it, but that's fine. This was just the level of like future planning and intricacies that I couldn't even fathom. It was just so good. In terms of a thriller, I would choose The Night Swim by Megan Golden. One of my favorite thrillers that I've read so far this year. Also has a podcast element, which is fun. There was basically like two different mysteries you're following in this book, and they were both done so flawlessly that this book definitely goes on my like top 5 or top 10 thrillers that I've ever read. I should have mentioned it before now in this video actually, but this one, it was just so good. And if I wrote a thriller, I would want it to be as intricate and as flawless as this one. Another question was, what is a book that you would recommend to your mom? And it would definitely be The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I've told her this before. Mom, if you're watching, read this book. Thank you. Okay, another question that I really love and will bring in another chart is, do you think your reading taste has changed either from last year or from the beginning of the year? And I would say yes and no. I think compared to last year, I read a lot more horror last year. And I say no because my favorite genres are just always at the top of the chart. So here you could see that I've read 19 fantasies, making it my most read genre. Makes sense. Next is romance at 12, which also checks out. I love a good romance, especially as a palate cleanser in between the fantasies. Then general, just like lit fic, has been 10. Thrillers have been 7, which is another, it checks out because it's either I gravitate towards a romance or a thriller in between. I love always having either a romance or thriller on audio. Those are my favorite genres to listen to as I'm like working out or doing chores around the house. Ugh, what a time to be alive. Then we have 5 horror books, 4 mysteries, 4 nonfiction, 1 historical fiction, and 1 sci-fi. I feel like all these check out, except I would say I'm a little bit surprised that sci-fi is so low, but I also guess I know that I don't gravitate towards sci-fi a whole lot, which is something that I would want to change in the future because I know that I could really like sci-fi. I'd like to bump up my nonfictions a little bit more as well. I'm excited that I'm reading more mysteries though. Like I'm really liking that journey as well. And obviously fantasy will always be my first love, so that's not surprising. One of my favorite questions was the very first one that I got, and it was like, what was the biggest thing that you've learned? And I think that it's a really great question because this is what I've learned, okay? This is what I've learned this year, is that wanting to have my booktube channel and wanting to write a book, almost impossible. It is so hard to do both of those things unless I started making content about writing. Like I started doing like writing vlogs or something like that. I know there's always a couple people that are like, yes, we would love writing vlogs, but I'm so worried to do that because I also know that it's not what the majority of people are here for, and that's fine. But I also might start experimenting with that a little bit to just, you know, test the waters because I think that I do absolutely want to publish something one day. It's been a goal of mine since I was a wee child, but I have learned that it is near impossible to do everything that I'm doing on BookTube and Patreon and still want to write a book. The way that I structure my life right now with BookTube and work and everything else, I don't have room to fully immerse myself into the world that I want to write. So I need to figure something out if I, you know, want to pursue that passion as well. So it's a work in progress, but I've definitely learned that this year. And then the last question I think that we have is, are you still excited about the goals you've created? Are you making any changes? One of my big goals was reading down my physical TBR, and I've made a lot of steps this year to make that happen. And I think that I'm doing a pretty good job at that. My battery's gonna die at any second. But that being said, this little graph shows like how my books were acquired. 43% of my books that I've read so far this year, I have already owned. That's phenomenal. I love that. 33% I have purchased, probably for videos, most likely. 16% of the books I've read this year were gifted to me, 5% were through my library, and 3% were through Kindle Unlimited. But that goal is evidently doing pretty well. I am reading my own TBR, but I do think that I could use my library so much more than I do. So that would be a goal that I'm wanting to change a little bit and stop impulse purchasing. Like if I'm out at an indie bookstore, maybe try the library first, and then if you like it, then buy it. I need to adopt that a little bit stronger in the last half of the year / just the rest of my life. Then the last thing I wanted to do is try to focus on bigger video projects. And obviously I started this 5-Star Showdown vlog series, and I'm really proud and really excited about it, but I want to do more like destination type vlogs with Caleb where, you know, we go like camping for a weekend and we read some sort of themed book or something like that. I want to do more like travel vlogs and also just bigger like list vlogs. I love a list video. Like how I've done like reading Kindle Unlimited's most popular books of 2023 or reading BuzzFeed's most recommended books. You know, stupid things like that. I love those stupid things. I think they're so much fun, and I also love the like challenge videos, like swapping screen time for reading, the spinner wheel chooses how many hours I read, all of those. I want to keep doing those. I think they're super fun to watch. They're very fun to make as well. But that being said, it kind of goes into the last graph that I wanted to show you, which is the books that I'm reading. Are they a mood read or are they being like required of me? The required section includes like my book club and specific TBRs for a video. And then the mood read is literally like I picked it up because I wanted to read it. I'm not vlogging that book at all. 68% of my reading is for a video or required. And I would still say most of the 68% is like I'm still very excited to read. I don't look at that percentage and think that I'm being told what to read like that much of the time, but some of the books definitely are like I had no intention of picking it up at this time. Would I have maybe chosen something else? I don't know, maybe. Am I mad that I read them? No. But there is 32% of my reading so far this year that I've just picked up on a whim and have read it just because, and that's really great. I think that this split kind of makes sense in terms of wanting to create interesting and clickbaity topics sometimes while also staying true to just like wanting to read to have fun, even though those required TBRs are also very fun sometimes. So yeah, that's it. Are we gonna make it before my camera dies? Wow, what a time to be alive. Let me know down below what your favorite book of the year has been. But if you don't know what else to say, then leave me the lemon emoji down below in the comments. And while you're down there, please do subscribe and like the video. I always appreciate your support. And of course, be kind to one another and happy reading. Bye.